everybody. Welcome to the Wicked Reads panel. I'm Danielle Paige. I'm the author of Dorothy Must Die and the upcoming Stealing Snow series. It's going to be a Snow Queen retelling. It's awesome. It's coming out next year in the fall. I am so lucky to be, I think we're ringing. Someone's ringing. I'm so lucky to be here with these amazing YA authors, and I'm going to, just to keep this moving because we don't have a lot of time and we have a lot of people, let you guys introduce yourselves, starting with Zac Brewer. And tell me about your book.
Okay.
Latest.
Hi, I'm Zac Brewer. I'm mostly known writing under a pseudonym Heather Brewer for my Chronicles of Vladimir Todd series and the Slayer Chronicles and a bunch of other stuff. But my most recent book is The Cemetery Boys. It's a really creepy small town horror, and have coming out in 2016 a book actually dealing with family and why it's not perfect. It's called The Blood Between Us.
My name is Michael Buckley. I'm probably known for writing the Sisters Grimm series and a series called Nerds. I have a new teen novel out called Undertow. It's about a day on the beach in Coney Island when 30,000 immigrants arrive on the shore and build a tent city, but the problem is that they aren't human.
Hi, I'm Danielle Vega. I have 2 books out right now. The first is The Merciless. It is The Craft meets Mean Girls. It's about a group of, thank you. It's about a group of mean girls at a high school who they seem really cool. They have all the cool clothes and really great hair. And then they kidnap another student and tie her up in the basement of an abandoned house and decide to perform an exorcism on her because they think she's possessed. So, basic high school stuff. My second book, The Survive the Night, is about a group of teens who go to a illegal rave in the New York City subways. And it kind of turns deadly when one of them winds up completely disemboweled and bloody in a subway tunnel. And so they need to escape the tunnels that they're now trapped inside of, but something down there is trying to kill them. So your basic New York City commute.
Hey, my name's Jake Halpern. I'm actually a journalist, but an interloper in the horror genre. My book, Nightfall, is about a world where there's 14 years of light and 14 years of darkness. And these kids grow up over the arc of a single sun. And as night is falling, everyone on this island is getting ready to leave and roll out on this 500-mile tide that they must ride exactly when it turns. And at that, about 2 hours of 4, a kid goes missing, and there's this frantic search for the kid. And this brother and sister go back into the woods, and they know where the kid is, and they find him, but he's busted his ankle, and they kind of drag him out of the woods. And by the time they get back to the shore where the ocean once was, there's just 5 miles of wet rocks and flopping dead fish, and the ships are in the horizon, and the last sliver of sun just drops behind the horizon, and night falls.
I'm April Genevieve Tucholke. I put together a horror anthology called Slasher Girls and Monster Boys, and I have another book coming out in March called Wing Poppy Midnight that has 3 main characters, and one's a hero, one's a villain, and one's a liar.
Okay, it's hard to follow. You're not an interloper. We're going to suck you in, Jake. It's done. It's that journalism thing. It's over. My name's Kim Liggett. This is my debut, Blood and Salt. It was pitched as Romeo and Juliet meets Children of the Corn. And that is pretty much really accurate. But they call it romantic horror. I prefer horromance. It's not really... See? They like it. Ari, my editor's like, no, don't ever say that. But there's cults. There's a really hot romance. There's a lot of blood, sometimes at the same time. And it is, it's true. And it's scary, and it's fun and harrowing, and there's corn, demonic corn.
Okay. I like the idea of demonic corn. Yes, thank you guys. So let's begin with the obvious and talk about how you define horror. So Stephen King said that there were 3 types of horror: the gross out, the sight of a severed head tumbling down a flight of stairs. It's when the lights go out and something green and slimy spatters against your arm. the horror, the unnatural spiders the size of bears, the dead waking up and walking around. It's when the lights go out and something with claws grabs you by the arm. And the last and worst one is terror, when you come home and notice everything you own has been taken away and replaced by the exact substitute. It's when the lights go out and you feel something behind you. You hear it, you feel its breath against your ear, and then when you turn around, there's nothing there. So what scares you?
I used to always say that I'm afraid of the dark, but it's not true. I'm afraid of what's in the dark. I don't like going through a dark room because the thing might get me. I frequently rescue my husband. I save his life all the time because when he goes to bed, he'll fall asleep with his arm over the edge. You can't have that. The thing is going to get you. So I grab his arm and tuck it back onto the bed and be like, I saved your life last night. You owe me. You know? But for me, I'd say really being utterly alone is absolutely terrifying. And I grew up, I was a very bullied child all the way through school. And so also criticism completely terrifies me. Being that one person that's on the outs.
Michael?
How about you, Michael?
I honestly don't know if anything really scares me other than Fox News. That food court out there is pretty fucking scary.
Danielle, you said that nothing scares you in your bio.
Yes. No, I'm not really afraid of anything. I blame my mother. She read me horror novels when I was way, way too young. And since then, all of the really basic stuff, I'm pretty immune to. The one thing that I'm just deadly, like practically phobic, scared of is cockroaches. And they actually fulfill all three of those requirements. Like they're gross.
Yep, gross.
I know. This is the worst place for me to live. But they're gross. They're psychologically terrifying. Like, why do they need all that armor anyway? Like, what are they thinking? And I forget what the third one was, but they're like that too. Terror.
Yeah.
They're all three types of scary. They're going to rule the world someday. We just all need to be on the lookout.
Yeah, I'm definitely afraid of the dark. But also afraid of being in a situation where there's two shitty choices. I was talking about this before. When I was a kid, we snuck into this old abandoned asylum. I'm from Buffalo, New York. There's an amazing, go Google it. It's an H.H. Richardson building, and it's part of the Buffalo State campus. And we used to sneak in. There was one window, and there was a cop car that circled it, and you'd wait. It's the old thing where you wait till the cop car passes, and you come out of the bushes, and up you go. And we got in, and there was this crazy rainstorm that came over, and the roof was all busted, so the water cascaded down the stairway and turned the stairway into a waterfalls, and then all the walls started sweating. So me and my brother were like, let's get the fuck out of here. And we ran back to the window, and there's the cop car parked, like parked right there. And so it was like the classic shitty choice. Like, would you rather get arrested or like wait it out in the sweating walls?
You got arrested?
And luckily, actually, the situation was solved and the cop moved on. But I think the fear that I have is being in a bad situation and there's no good choice. Yeah.
April?
I'm scared of everything. I'm scared of the dark and cockroaches and corn. I'm really terrified of ghosts. I lived in a haunted house in college, and sometimes the walls would cry. They would, and ever since then, I can't. I can't.
I'm kind of like April. I'm scared of everything. I mean, like even stupid things like puddles and crowds and Kathy Lee Gifford. But yeah, I'm not afraid to die. I mean, that's my only saving grace. Like I've
That's a
lived
big
this.
one.
It is though. I've lived this amazing life, and I've done everything I wanted to do and more. And I'm kind of all good with that. But I even have a plan. Like my kids know, like they're cremated. They're gonna spread my ashes over my hometown so I can haunt them forever.
Haunting's a good plan.
It is
That
a
should
good
be all of
solid
our
plan. I know.
Yeah.
To haunt.
Yeah.
So this is how I'm gonna get back on the ghost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then you are the one crying in the walls.
Exactly.
I kind of want to hear a little bit more about this house
with that.
Okay, so who popped your horror cherry? What was your first horror book or movie that you feel like We're at Comic-Con. You feel like talking about. Zach, or do you want to go?
No, it's cool. My first exposure to horror was scary stories to tell in the dark. And now, the stories themselves were pretty terrifying, but that artwork, man, and they were for kids. I'm like, wow, no wonder I'm so messed up now, you know? But yeah, that was
I think that's why we're all messed up here,
Right?
Is because of those books.
When I was a kid, my grandfather was a beekeeper. And when he would take the honey from the hives, he'd bring it into the house, and my grandmother would strain it so the bees knew where the honey was, and they wanted it back. So they would like just cover the windows so it would get dark in the house because the bees had blotted out all the sunshine. And I think that the thing that totally freaked me out was this movie back in the 70s called The Swarm. In which like a killer bee swarm attacked all these bee-level actors. It was horrible.
Have you written about that's amazing? Yeah, no.
So my mom used to read me Stephen King books when I was like too old to or too young to read. Those were my bedtime stories. So I don't really remember the first encounter I ever had with horror. The one that I remember the most clearly is Alien. I watched that when I was very, very young. And I don't remember being scared so much as just like empowered because she's so badass. And yeah, so I was just like, I'm going to be Ripley when I grow up. Like, I can handle everything. But yeah, it's fantastic.
So I was always like a really slow reader as a kid. So I feel like the scary stories that I got that freaked me out were the campfire stories. And the one, it's probably the same for a bunch of you, is the story about the kid. I think it's a girl, and she's lying in her bed. She's home by herself, and she's with her dog, and she keeps on putting her hand beneath the bed, and the dog keeps licking her fingers. And then all of a sudden, some dude, like a fireman, runs up the stairs and just grabs her, and as they're running down the stairs, it's the dog all cut up on the entranceway, and it's like the crazy dude has been licking her tongue under the bed. And
It's the humans can lick too.
He writes it on the wall. Humans can lick too.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, that, messed me up for a long time.
Well, and in the version I heard, they don't catch him. She wakes up the next morning and he's gone.
Oh, see, that's
and it says on the wall, humans can lick too.
That's much scarier, yeah.
Come back.
Is this the one where the guy goes, "I'm gonna get you, now I'm gonna eat you"?
I think
Is that the one?
I like this.
It's a different version of it.
Okay. Maybe I dreamed that. I don't know.
My first encounter with horror, real horror, was, this is a supposedly true story. In school, the older sister of a friend of mine was driving on a rural road, and she came to a stop sign and stopped, and some guy jumped out of the ditch and crawled into her car because she hadn't locked the passenger door. And I blocked out what happened after that, which probably means it's not a true story. But I obsessively lock all my car doors now. I've never gotten over it.
That's scary.
I think my first, big impression for sure was The Exorcist, watching that. And still, it's the one thing that I cannot watch by myself. I really did think like the devil was following me pretty much my whole childhood. Maybe he still is. No, but I don't know. He might still be. Actually, I'm sure of it. But also the book, the story that that left like a huge impression on me is The Lottery from Shirley Jackson, and that's what I write about, funny enough. All of my books have that common thread of small towns, and there's something like so insidious about these charming people in this charming town with these charming ceremonies, and it always turns bad, and I love that sucker punch. Like, I live for that in horror, so.
Okay, well, we're going to jump around so that Zach doesn't have to answer first every single time, although he's amazing at doing it. So how do you research your books? Did you, go to some place where there's no light? Did you kidnap a girl in high school? Michael, do you have control over water that we don't know about? Like, should we be worried? Yeah. Anyone can start, or I can pick you. What do you think? I'm going to start with Michael.
Well, I think I told you earlier the stories about immigrants coming to the U.S. who aren't human. They're sort of mer people, but they don't all look like the Little Mermaid. Some of them are sort of grotesque and disgusting. And I was just totally inspired because every once in a while on the internet I'd get this like weird thing on Facebook. It's like creepy things in the water, and they would be these shots of these really deep sea animals, and one of them was an anglerfish. Have you guys ever seen that? Yeah, with these giant teeth and that thing that glows in front of its face, and I thought that's got to be a character in a book. The more I saw pictures of that, the more I started digging and found that was just like the tip of the iceberg of really bizarre things that are actually real and alive. And then just trying to make them a little more humanoid was the fun of it.
Anyone else? Research?
You should get started.
My book, I did a ton of research on alchemy and perfume and all of those things that are a big part of this book. But corn, I grew up in the corn. I grew up in a town of like 500 people in Kansas, and there's a lot of corn. And I never got over it, clearly. But yeah, in the manuscript that I sold, to Penguin, it didn't have any corn. I think there was one line in the book that said like an endless sea of corn or something, and it was caves predominantly that surrounded this town. And my editor, who's here today, Ari Lewin, she said she's like, nah, I don't really like caves. And so that was about 60% of the book. So I just kind of threw in corn, and she's like, yeah, I like corn, and so that's how that came to be. But a lot of research. I'll be writing that cave book. Don't worry, Ari, that's coming for you.
So I'll jump. So in our book, like the sun sets and these kids are left, and there's other things on this island. In fact, part of the ritual as they're leaving is they are repairing the house in this way that makes no sense to the kids. They have to take the locks off the doors. They have to set the table. They have to bring these creepy knives out of the basement and put them into the mantle, and it makes this grinding noise because the sharpeners are built into the mantle. And when it becomes apparent after they're left behind that there are these things that lurk in the island that are coming to reclaim the home, the question then emerges like, A, are the parents so stupid or willfully oblivious that they really didn't know that this was the case and they were just following these rituals? Or did they know and they kept it a secret? And if they knew and they kept it a secret, the question is, how in God's name could you keep such a secret? And so my research, so I mentioned that I was a journalist. I had done this story for This American Life called Switched at Birth, where these two girls were switched at birth, and the one mother knew she had the wrong child. And she didn't say anything. Well, she told her husband refused to believe her. And she then stayed friendly with the other family so she could watch her child raised by another family across town. But the crazy part was the mother who knew would tell people. And so the girls didn't find out until they were 40, but by the time they knew, virtually everyone else in this town knew that they had been switched except them. And so it's like my co-author Peter's like, dude, how could they not know that there are these things? I was like, it's weird, but in small towns, like crazy secrets can exist everywhere except around the one person. And so I felt like I was able to say, I think this like has some realness to it.
I love that.
That's that actually, can I go? 'Cause
Yeah,
that's
please.
like a perfect segue
Yes.
into what I'm going to say. I'm from a small town in Michigan. Okay? If you're from Michigan, you have a map, okay? This is Michigan. We're the mitten state. Educate yourselves. So I'm from here. And anytime you go up to anybody from Michigan and you say, where are you from? They'll go. And then you're like, why are you pointing at your hand? So I'm from Michigan, population 814 people. It was a really, really miserable town. And the Cemetery Boys is actually, I said to myself, if I'm going to write a horror, what's the scariest thing I can think of to write? Oh, I know, going home. And so it's about how, unfortunately, small towns often are full of small minds. It's about the power of belief and how far you will go to protect those beliefs. And it's also, there's this huge thread through the entire thing that's also about mental illness. I frequently speak out about mental illness because I have it. most people are dealing with something. I deal with depression and OCD and anxiety and suicidal issues. And so my main character is actually kind of in a situation that's really unfortunate. His mom was locked away because there was no more that they could do. They thought maybe she's schizophrenic, we don't know, but no medications, no therapy is working for her. So they lock her away, and he's taken from Colorado all the way to Michigan to live with a grandmother he's never met who hates him. And then he gets mixed up in other stuff, but small towns, absolutely.
April, you have an anthology that you didn't really talk about, but you based a lot of. Oh, well, I'm also in the anthology, so I think we should talk about it. No, but can you tell us like what the setup was for that? Since you do have our research is other horror, so.
Like how to organize an
Yeah.
anthology
No, I mean more of the inspiration.
for my story,
Yes,
or the
just the theme of using old stories to.
You're doing such a good job.
No, come on. You were the queen of this anthology. She organized this great anthology, and she's going to tell us about it.
Well, the title came out of a conversation that I was having with some of the authors, and we were talking about slasher movies and monster movies, and so then we thought, well, Slasher Girls and Monster Boys would be, pretty cool as a theme, and then each story is inspired by mostly horror movies, some horror books, and then some songs as well. Liber Digos was a Nirvana song, yeah, that's all I have.
That was good.
Thank you.
Yes. Sorry to force you. It's just really cool. I had a lot of fun doing it.
Danielle's story is fantastic.
I wasn't trying to get you to praise me, but I'll take it. Okay, going back to Stephen King again. How do you guys feel about him? Was he like a god to you? Like, was there a first Stephen King moment? Are there other influences like Hitchcock or who's your jam?
I have props.
I knew that you would.
Accidental
And a story.
props, okay? And a story. Do you know which story it
I
is?
know
Do
your
you remember?
story.
Okay.
I love the story.
All right, so
Sort of afraid.
my husband no
It's good,
longer
it's good,
has
it's
to
good.
buy me any gifts ever. I expect him to,
It's
but
really
he doesn't
sweet.
have to. The reason is because he gave me this. This is a first edition hardcover copy of Carrie by Stephen King. Now, it takes a moment, but let me tell my story, okay? Hold on a second. Here's the deal. My husband decided I'm going to get Zach a first edition copy of Carrie for Christmas. Won't that be amazing? And then this little light bulb came over his head, and he went, oh, but what if I could get it signed? So he contacted my agent and said, who do you know? How can we figure this out? And my agent gave him a list of people and said, contact these, probably not, but, give it a shot because he doesn't do that. So the book went away, and it was gone. The publisher didn't send the book back, and this was a very expensive book. And so we were really bummed, and Paul told me all about it, and he was like, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, you know what? The thought really does count, though. That was incredible. This was the book that made me want to be an author. So it meant a lot to me. And then I'm at a signing one day, and I have all my minions are all lined up, and they're coming up, and I'm signing books, and everything's so great. And this woman comes up, and she said, excuse me, but does Stephen King read your books? And I said, oh, does God read the Bible? That'd be amazing. But yeah, no, I'm pretty sure Stephen King has never read my books. She goes, that's great. Could you make this out to Uncle Stevie? And I went, Uncle Stevie? She goes, yes, I want you to make this out to Stephen King. And I went, you want me to sign a book for Stephen King? She goes, yeah, I'm his niece, actually. I live right here in St. Louis, and I'd love to give it to him because he's such a big supporter of newer writers. And I was like, wow, that's fantastic. So Paul, unbeknownst to me, pulls her out of the line when she was done. And I'm floating the rest of the night because I signed a book for Stephen King. And Paul talks to her and says, look, here's the story. And he had apparently included a letter with it that when I give my entire spiel about my life, I always talk about how when I was younger, people always told me that being a writer was not a real job. That was something people with trust funds did, okay? So apparently, Carrie, this copy, was sitting on Stephen's desk for 4 months, a mystery in the King household, and he signed it to me, and he ended it with, P.S., I didn't have a trust fund either. So
Love
that's
that
my
story.
Stephen King story.
I cannot top that story.
I should have made you go last, Zach. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I love Stephen King. I think the first thing I ever read was Cujo, which is just the worst book for a kid who loves dogs. And but I think that for me the horror that really made a difference was The Sandman by Neil Gaiman, which was a big thing. And I have a sort of a similar story. When when I was in college, The Sandman came to an end. And I convinced the school paper to let me write an article and interview him about how it was going to end. And I called DC Comics up and I said, "Can I have Neil Gaiman's email address?" Thinking no way, and they gave it to me. So I wrote to him and I said, I gave him like 10 questions about what it was, and his first response was, "How did you get my email?" But like Lovecraft was a big influence on me, and but comics, anything with comics, like Hellboy, was a big influence. And like they were saying earlier that you went to see Alien as a small child. I too had a parent who was really bad at being a parent, and took me when I was 7. Most movies my father took me to were excuses for him to take a nap. And he slept through the thing coming out of the guy's belly, and that was probably what started all this for me too.
No, that's so awesome. I love that I'm not the only one who was damaged early in life. So Stephen King, I mean, he's the beginning of why I wanted to be a writer. He's really important to me now. I already told you when I was young, my mom used to read the stories from mostly It. It was the big one. She would just kind of retell them in her own words because she was a like. Are you scared? Does that scare you? No.
Very excited.
It.
I wish my mom had done this.
Yeah, like she would retell all of the little stories that happened to the boys and to Beverly and It as though they were her stories, because she was kind of a wannabe horror writer herself. And I think more than anything, she was my biggest influence as a very young writer, because she would tell me these stories from Stephen King, and then she would tell me these creepy things that happened to her when she was little. So this is a really quick story. I just want to tell a story because they're telling good stories, and I only have one. But she has this story of her and her sister going over to the neighbor girl's house to spend the night. And they're staying awake all night talking like girls do and like looking at the ceiling. And after it gets really dark, they go and they turn out the light. And then the next morning, they're kind of doing the same thing, and they're staring at the ceiling, talking to each other. But this time, there's something on the ceiling that looks like a little bug or something. And so one of them gets up on the bed and checks it out. And it's not a bug. It's 2 little holes drilled into the ceiling, like eye-width apart. And so the thing about the neighbor girl's house is that there's an attic right over the bedroom. And they're like, what is going on? So they race up to the attic. They don't find anything. They tell the neighbor girl's parents, like, this happened, what's going on? And the parents go and look at the 2 little holes that are 2 little perfectly round holes. And they're like, it's probably just the old house settling. I wouldn't worry about it. It's fine. And so my mom and her sister are terrified, but they're kids. So after a couple of weeks, they forget about it and they come and they do the same thing, sleeping in the neighbor girl's room, fall asleep, turn off the light, wake up a little bit later to this sound, this kind of like scratching sound. And they immediately remember the holes and they're like, what is going on? And so they turn on the lights, race upstairs, get the parents out of bed, go check out the attic, and there's nothing there. And they're just like, crap, this is just a mystery. We're just never going to figure out what it is. So everybody goes back to bed, and they're all 3 laying in bed, terrified, until finally someone is like, we have to check under the bed. We have to check under the bed. And of course, as soon as she says it, everybody's like, of course we have to check under the bed. So my mom gets out of the bed and peeks under the bed, and there's a shoebox. And she pulls it out, and there's a drill with fresh plaster on it. That's the end of the story. We don't know what happened. Huh? No, that's my mom's story.
Your
Yeah.
mom is the creator of the original.
Yeah, that's my mom's story. It happened to her and her sister. So if it was an urban legend, then like her brothers redid the legend for her or something because it really happened. I've got confirmation from 3 different people that this happened.
So creepy.
Nobody knows how it happened or what happened. But yeah, that was the first like good urban legend I heard. And
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Didn't that happen in Porky's?
It could be a different type of legend.
I'm going to get dark in a different kind of way. I would say I'm kind of a nonfiction guy, and I would say Night by Elie Wiesel. The fear that they're going to come and get you at night and that it's true. I remember reading that as a kid. There's a power to the true stories that kind of, the other scare you in kind of a different way. The true stories kind of feed you in more of like get your soul. And I remember I was so struck by it that years later I took some time off from college and I was living in Prague. And my great uncle was a Holocaust survivor. And this family story was he had been saved by his best friend who hid him under his bed for 3 years. So I was always thinking like, Jesus, what's it like to live under some dude's bed for 3 years? And so I didn't speak Czech, but I had a friend who did, and we went to Bratislava, and we found this guy, my uncle's friend, who had hit him. And I wanted to see if it was true, really, among other things. And I said, is it true that you hid him under your bed for 3 years? And he said, no, it wasn't for 3 years. It was only for about 9 months. The rest of the time, what we did is we had this secret room at the back of the house. And when the Gestapo would come, I would go to the gate with the 2 dogs. And if it was actually just small trouble, I let the little dog go. But if it was big trouble, like the Gestapo, let the big dog go. And he's telling me the story. And so he says, one time, only once, we got to the front gate and the Gestapo was there and let the big dog go. And the plan then was for him to go and hide in a hole in the backyard where they had put a board over the hole and put some grass over the board. And they did it, but the neighbor had tipped him off the Gestapo about this hole. And the men walked, my great uncle was telling me the story, and so was his friend, they walked across the yard with the butts of the rifle, pounding on the ground for the hollow spot. And I just thought to myself, like, what's it like to be in the hollow spot with the men walking over at the rifle butts, pounding the ground, right? And I don't know, I guess for me, like, I will never give up the nonfiction because I'm not creative enough to make that up. And the horror that strikes, I feel, is a horror that can only come from someplace that's real. So for me, it's probably Night.
I'm very scared now. April, do you want to follow that? That feels like a bit of a mic drop, but I think you can handle it.
no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. No pressure. But what about the college house that cried? Was there did you find out? Was there a story behind that? Was there someone died there?
There was a story. The house was built by a doctor named Dickinson Rose. I still remember his name, and his wife died in childbirth. And I suppose it was her who cried in the night. I'd go across the hall and wake up the frat boys who lived next door, and I'm like, "Can you sit with me until the crying stops?" And they'd come over, and we'd wait. It was really dramatic.
And it's also the way Scream Queens begins. There's like a girl in a tub who
Oh, I'm watching
yeah,
Scream
you should,
Queens.
yeah.
I mean, Stephen King, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Night Shift, right? The collection of short stories. I mean, my cover is ripped off now, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was called. But Children of the Corn is in that. But I think it was because I was dyslexic, and so they gave that was like a really great way to consume these stories in little bits and actually finish them. So that was a good thing. But I'm a complete Stephen King junkie. I'll read anything he writes forever and ever.
When did you read your first story?
Oh gosh, it's probably I was 7. But again, being dyslexic, I mean, they let me read whatever I wanted. I mean, they just kind of put up with my book reports, like, oh God. Because I read like a ton of romance and a ton of really scary stories. That's what I liked.
How old were you? Were you Stephen King?
I mean, I don't remember when she told me my first one.
I think I was probably like 7 or 8 too.
Yeah.
My mom. It was like my mom was reading it, so I took it off of her nightstand. Also, some Jackie Collins. And,
Oh yeah, definitely.
I ended up writing soaps, so I think it really worked out for me.
Yeah.
So, how about you guys? Were you really young when you started reading horror?
When I started reading Stephen King,
Yeah.
I was 7 too.
Yeah.
You know, apparently this
I
is
was
normal.
14. I thought it was incredibly young. I was like
Totally
reading The
normal.
Secret Garden, and then I went to Stephen King, The Shining.
It's like the same thing, right?
We didn't really have like too many books in the house, to be honest. I mean, I read pretty much what my mom had, which was like Irma Bombeck books. So I know what it's like to be like a suburban mom.
It comes through in
Yeah.
your work. I feel that. But we just mentioned Scream Queens, and there seems to be a resurgence in horror now with The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, American Horror Story, Scream Queens. And do you see that there's something different or new in horror than the stuff that we've grown up with? Is it evolving?
Personally, here's the thing. I don't feel like we push it nearly as much as when I was growing up. You know, I'm 42, so, you know, I got the heyday of Stephen King at his peak. And I feel like things now are a little more soft. I enjoy American Horror Story a lot. It doesn't scare me. I haven't watched Scream Queens because I've had a couple of horror pals tell me, it's cute. You know, I would like to see things going a little bit more dark and just really, really scare some people.
Scream Queens is cute. It is cute, yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree that I think, especially on television, you're getting a lot of like a wink to the audience. The horror is a lot more playful, I think, than what it was when we were kids. I mean, I think about like Salem's Lot. I don't even think you could get Salem's Lot on TV now. It's just too freaky. But yeah, I mean, I think it almost has to be like the world that they create where this horror exists has to be so over the top. That's the only way the audience can swallow it.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot of the horror that comes out now is kind of mixed with other things. Like you'd see horror in dystopian stories. So you'd see like the zombie apocalypse shows or the zombie apocalypse books that have a little bit of horror in them. Or when vampires were big, you know, that's kind of touching on horror. At least it was at a certain point. Then it went to a different romantic place. But yeah, you see a lot of horror mixed with something else. And that's great. I think so many of those books and movies and television shows are really fun to watch. But I agree with Zach. I miss the days of like really good, solid, just horror. I like to say that when I started writing The Merciless and Survive the Night, I really wanted to draw back on some of these great slasher movies that I used to watch when I was a kid. Scream was a big one. I remember reciting the lines to Scream with friends in like our bedroom. We would just like, because this is before the internet, so you couldn't just find the scripts. But we would like write it out in our little notebook, like all of the lines, and then we would just read them like we were the characters because we were really cool. So I just grew up on this stuff and I loved it so much, and you don't see that kind of slasher movie anymore. That kind of just, there is a bad guy with a knife and he's gonna come get you. Instead it's, you know, they're like the Paranormal Activity movies. There's more of a hook. It's a little bit different. So I don't know if it's better or worse. I'm excited to see more of it happening and stop. Just the fact that more of it's on TV, the fact that more people are writing it is incredibly exciting. And if the way that we have to get there is to mix it with other things and be a little bit more creative about how we're giving it to people, then that's fine with me. I just want more scary.
So I have two little boys, so I'm like always seeing everything they're watching. It always feels like stuff that's geared to them. It's so front-loaded with action. It's like they don't trust that kids will be patient to hear a story. That if you start too slow and have a slow build, that kids will flick the channel. And honestly, I think they underestimate kids. I think it's bullshit. I think that a good story, I see as my wife and I talk about it, that takes its time and that has a slow kind of, you know, build up. Like the M. Night Shyamalan movies or just so many great books that we all like, that kids will go for it. And, you know, we probably all see it. We go to schools and you do a little bit of storytelling. But I feel like they're being short-sold. So that's the thing that I kind of miss from storytelling.
Well, don't you think children's movies used to be darker anyway?
I think
Yeah.
yes.
The Dark Crystal.
The Dark Crystal.
Holy cow. Holy cow. What was happening?
Oh, I know what was happening.
I actually like all of the new horror. I'm a big fan of American Horror Story and all those shows. I mean, and I think anything that is bringing people into the genre, I'm all for that because there's something for everyone. And I'm not gonna, I love old school horror, and my next book, actually, The Last Harvest, little plug, is old school YA horror straight up. So I mean, I love it, but I like it all, and I think bring it on. If we can bring more people into the horror genre, I'm all for that. However they come, it's good.
I think there's a horror sort of pops up in unexpected places too, like that episode of Doctor Who with the Weeping Angels. I mean, who doesn't freak out with that? and you were saying like with kids, like we've sort of like tamed them, but my kid plays this game called Five Nights at Freddy's, which makes me like cry. It's so stressful.
I don't know. What happens in this game?
They're like they're in a Chuck E. Cheese, which is a scary thing to begin with.
Terrifying.
And all of the things, all the automatons, they come to life at night and they keep killing people. And you're the new night security guy.
Oh my
and
God.
you can't really leave this room. You have to just watch the monitors. And like these things are just like suddenly the monitor goes black and then it comes back on and the robot isn't there. And you're like, ah! And you're trying to lock both. There's two doors and you're trying to lock both of them to make sure they don't get you on either side. So I think that it's there. It's sneaky now. Like they trick you into scaring your pants off.
Yeah, I think that what Kim said, I think horror is creeping into other genres. I think in a weird, like I look at Game of Thrones and like someone dies every 5 seconds, and you like, and that's story-wise, like storytelling-wise, that's something that other stories didn't do as much, and they do now. So a quick craft question, and then I want to open it up to Q&A. So how do you feel that writing horror is different from writing other stories? Like you came from nonfiction. This is your first YA. Like how does it feel writing this versus writing other stuff? And if you've already been writing horror, what do you think is different from other writing? Anybody?
I think writing horror is kind of like writing comedy. Which is a weird comparison, but it's like you don't know what's going to scare somebody else. You have to really pay attention to the tone that you're presenting in the entire book in order for the horror to hit the way it needs to. You need to study it. Like it's, when I was writing, I would write like these children's adventure stories before I got into this. And, they're just, it's writing stories and they have different types of challenges to them. But with writing horror, I've had to entrench myself in it. I have to study it. I have to set the mood. I have to really pay attention to all of the different details of how I word sentences and how I create the scenes. And it's just to get this one good scare. And the only other time I've heard people talk about writing that way is when comedy writers talk about their craft and they talk about how difficult it is to get a joke and how you have to set up so much in order for a joke to fall correctly.
I think mysteries too, though, because dropping all the clues to get to the end.
It's just tricky. It's a different type of writing, and you really have to study it.
I think creepy just kind of happens to me. Well, I'm willing. Just set the scene. Where I write, it's my office. It's got gorgeous, beautiful black velvet flock wallpaper. I have a couch made out of an actual coffin that was used in a viewing. I have a human skull named Lucy. I love creepy. It's just who I am. So when I set out to write a story, I don't necessarily say, I'm going to write a horror story. How can I scare people? I go, okay, there's this person, and here's their problem, and I want to get to know them. And then the creepy just kind of falls in,
I write in an equally scary place. It's called Starbucks.
That's awesome.
I think that like writing scary for me was I just recently got to start doing it, and I have to say it feels mischievous and fun. Like sort of like Peter Pan gets to write a book in a way, and I just recently wrote a short story for an anthology called Guys Read. It's a book series for trying to get boys to read, and it's scary stories this time. And the story was about a kid who has an imaginary friend who won't go away, So they hire a psychiatrist and they do all this stuff to get rid of him, and then the little brother shows up and he's talking about his imaginary friend, and it's the same imaginary friend. And I read it to my wife, and she cried, and was just, this is too scary. And I was like, this is so much fun. It's sort of like being the bad kid in school in a way. Yeah.
I love that.
I have a good segue because I also was sharing this with my wife. But my wife, she's this Polish immigrant, and she'll never say it's good if she thinks it's bad. In fact, she once said to me, she has these little malaprops, and she said, "What, you want me to do wheel carts?" And I said, "Yes, I want you to do a lot of fucking wheel carts." So she was like, I don't like monsters. And it took her a little bit of convincing to read the book. And then she's like, she's also a scientist, by the way. And she's just like, no bullshit. She doesn't believe in God. I mean, just like anything that you can't prove and whatever, it's all very rational. And she got spooked. And I said, I thought you didn't care about monsters. And she said, oh, I don't. It's the dark, and you guys are like family now. You know this story so well. But I was like, that's ridiculous that you're scared of the dark. And she made this argument that was really awesome. She said basically, look, since the dawn of time, dark has been a time of danger and vulnerability. The night is when they came to get you. I mean, if you were walked out around the dark in the caveman days, you were done for. And our brains, it's evolutionarily advantageous to be afraid of the dark. It's what kept us alive. So it's perfectly rational that I'm afraid of the dark. And I thought about that a lot, and I thought that, like, everything else is dressing, is window dressing. The monsters and the rituals and the island, it's all window dressing. Like, at the end, it's all about tapping into this, my wife's rational fear of the dark. And I'm not like a horror guy, but like I latched onto that. It's like, okay, that's my kernel of truth. And if I can keep hitting that button in her brain, then this is going to work. And if I don't, then it's not.
I think you're now a horror guy. I don't think you keep saying that. Yeah.
We've claimed you.
Okay.
Does anyone else? Does anyone have any questions? David? I mean, guy in the audience. Black shirt.
Thank you, Ms. Paige. I want to follow up on what you were saying about the horror and comedy.
Yeah.
First of all, has anybody seen the new M. Night
Shyamalan.
The Visit. I'm going on Sunday.
Is it? I hope it's funny.
It's funny.
That's what I heard.
Really?
It's very scary. I've had a lot of experience writing horror and comedy for kids. It hurts terribly. So I'm very interested in that. I think that there's a really close relationship between horror and comedy, especially with the surprise factor that jokes take and horror takes. How do any of you view your relationship with comedy when you're writing horror? Do you find it presenting itself? Do you stay away from it? Do you let it in?
Well, for me, I'm a snarky person. You know what I mean? So humor has always been part of my life and part of who I am. So when I write, that funny always comes through at the most inopportune times. You know, when it really shouldn't be funny, it becomes funny. And that's just part of the way I see things. And I think that's because my dad messed me up. I grew up on a steady diet of Twilight Zone and, you know, all these old Nosferatu was amazing. All these really great old films, you know, Dracula and all these fantastic things. But as a kid, I think as a child, I processed it in a way that I could handle it. I wasn't scared of those things because they were kind of funny. And my dad would crack jokes during it. So for me, those two things are very married.
I definitely see what you're saying. When I moved to New York City after I graduated from college, I was a stand-up comic, and I did it professionally for about 10 years. I was an intern for Letterman. I had a regular gig at the comic strip uptown. So like comedy was just always a thing. I mean, I remember my brother waking me up when I was 6 to watch the very first episode of Saturday Night Live. He made me listen to Woody Allen albums and Steve Martin. I met Chris Farley and gave him the biggest hug I think I've ever given any human being. So comedy is a huge part of my life, and I think that it's ingrained in everything I've ever written. There's only so much serious I think I can handle myself.
Do you think that it allows for like that letdown of that quietness? Does it allow the scary to be more scary because you kind of get the audience to or the reader to let their guard down?
I think that if I have a struggle as a writer, it's basically letting the character breathe a little bit. I get very bored when the character's just sort of having these contemplative moments, and like I want something crazy to happen, and I want them reacting rather than settling. I think that's probably why I don't read a lot of contemporary YA. It's a lot of people sitting around complaining about their lives. I'd rather have people not have any time to worry about the terrible lives they're living because they're trying to stay alive. So I don't know. I definitely see the connection. It's just that like humor has just always been part of my life, so I can't even really dissolve it and see it objectively. Like I'm always Mr. Inappropriate. Yeah.
As we've seen today.
Yes.
Yeah.
As you've seen many times. Yes.
Anybody else? Any more questions? Anybody? I'm not. Oh, right here. Or back there, whichever. So the question is, what's your take on? Can everybody hear it? Are you good? Okay.
I'm just going to take this for a moment. So basically, I'm going to say it because we're all thinking it. What happened that made Dracula turn into a sparkly thing? Okay? If you liked Stephanie Meyer, that's awesome. She's apparently here. And I don't think she likes me. But and if you don't, that's totally fine too. But why did we get to that point where we had to like soften everything up, change things, make them more palatable? Honestly, I think it's a societal thing. I think that we, as generations have gone on, we have become more and more, to the point of ridiculous, careful with our children. We now don't go trick-or-treating. We go trunk-or-treating, where they march around a parking lot and gather candy. Michael's stealing my mic. Right? And we do. We water things down because I think that unlike when I was a kid and my dad's like, here, watch this. This is fantastic. And with my children, my son was 4 years old, saw his first zombie film, absolutely loved it. To this day, still a huge horror film. But I think we're so worried as a society about our kids that we tend to make everything softer and easier so that maybe we can take a little of that fear that we actually feel every day of our lives away and out of our fiction, which I think is a shame because kids are tough.
I think there's a natural inclination in storytelling to try to find the humanity in things. I mean, when I think about vampires, I think that was sort of inevitable. I think Buffy sort of set us up to have sympathy for the demons. But for me, the greatest tragedy of all time is when the Borg started getting sympathetic. And I'm like, of all, and what happens though, for me, or even when the Cylons, you're like, oh, I feel bad for them. I don't want to feel bad for them, but I understood the inclination to sort of give them character, so that it isn't just a mindless monster killing things. The problem I think with that is that they don't come up with good monsters to replace them. I mean, we're still doing vampires and werewolves. And where are the new creepy things?
Well, that's why we're all here.
Yeah, I'm like ghosts. Yeah. I really think that we should just put a fatwa on all these traditional characters. No more writing about elves, fairies, Yes, gnomes, vampires. Like we all have to come up with something brand new next year. That intended, and then we'll ruin it by making it sweet.
Okay, but
yeah, as someone who's doing a retelling next year, I'm not going to comment on that, but but yeah, I think that there's room at the table for everything, hopefully. But I agree with you that there's a lot of dumbing down or quieting of the horror, and I think that there should be more. Do we have more questions? Or do you guys have? No.
I think April had something to
April, do you have something?
have you read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell?
Yeah.
Now there's fairies that are terrifying.
Okay, another one of those then.
Well, it's not just vampires becoming like these sex gods. It's like fairies are getting scary. Like we're trying to
Switching.
we're letting these old creatures evolve in some interesting ways. And yes, sometimes they start to sparkle, but sometimes they do other things. Like I think like with Buffy was a fantastic thing to bring up because that was one of the first. That was one of the first retellings where we're really looking at like the humanity of this demon. And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking of Interview with a Vampire and realizing that there were other times that we've pushed the boundaries there, so it's not the first. But like you start to see this evolving, and sometimes it comes out and it's these fantastic, really rich stories with great new characters, and we're seeing these monsters in new light. And then other times it comes out and it's like, okay, that's maybe not my taste exactly because it's not scary anymore. But I love to see things
applaud the
evolving.
evolution,
Yes,
right?
please keep evolving, keep doing more things. It's always accepted.
Okay, I think we have one more question here.
I have to share, when you guys were talking about your early fears and what inspired you, my thought was Jaws. I saw Jaws.
Oh yeah.
So every time I got to the kiddie pool, I was scared to death. It scared the shit out of me. And I was pissed at my parents because of it. I think ever since then, even now in the beach and such, this fear is still there, and it made me feel like I was missing out on something. I'm flipping it now with what you guys are talking about, in that fear as an emotion. If you bring somebody to the very edge in that emotion to such an extent, that's exhilarating, right?
Yeah, it's adrenaline. Yeah, it makes you feel great. It makes you do things.
So I guess my question is that why you write horror and try to bring the strongest emotion, that emotion to the extent out of your readers?
I just want to say one thing, as I'm a huge Jaws fan too. And isn't it amazing how long we have to wait before we see the shark? And about the slow build, And I think that what terrifies so much about that is that there's nothing scarier than the thing we can't see. It's like we have that freaked out feeling of the breath in the back of the neck, or someone's following us. And yes, I just feel like that was worth saying. And yeah, absolutely. It's like, why the hell, if you're a kid, if you're a 9-year-old kid and you're at camp, right? And you're scared to begin with because you're sleeping in this creaky old bunk and like you're missing home. Why the hell would you sit around a fire and tell stories about kids that same age who get their heads chopped off? Like, it makes no sense. But other than your explanation, which is spot on, which is that we delight in it. We thrill in that feeling of being on the verge of death, even if it's vicariously.
And we literally have like 1 minute left, and I wanted you guys to get to tell me what your next project is, and also just to make it fun, what horror movie would you like to be dropped into, and how would you survive? Anyone first, but next project, just so I know.
My next project is I also have the sequel to Blood and Salt coming out, but also The Last Harvest, which is pitched as Friday Night Lights meets Rosemary's Baby. Yeah, it's straight up old school horror. It's so scary, so much fun.
And the horror movie?
Oh, the horror movie. I would die. Everyone knows I would die. I mean, you put me in any horror movie, my only like survival skill is to like be an opossum and roll over and pretend like I'm dead. I mean, but I honestly would die. I'm not even gonna like try to dead totally. No chance.
Next project that we probably do.
Yeah, I talked about Wink Poppy Midnight.
Okay, we're
I'm
good. Of what horror movie would get dropped into? When is coming out?
Okay, Wink Poppy Midnight's coming out in March.
Like, you don't want to get dropped into a horror movie for me.
Oh, the horror movie.
Yeah.
Oh.
We're living in Pushing Daisies.
Someone else can go first.
Yeah, we're
Like,
living in
everyone else
pushing daisies. We're gonna make pie and solve crimes. That's the.
April hates my question. Anybody else? I want to hear the projects, though. So what's your next, Jake? What's next for you? No, you go.
Yeah, it's about this island at the edge of the world where it's an island that serves as like a giant funeral home where the dead send their dead off the edge of the earth in a boat, and it drops off. Time's up, and and these kids rob the funeral boat.
What's it called?
It's called Edgelands.
Danielle?
It's called Burning. It's under my other name, which is Danielle Rollins. It's Orange is the New Black meets Carrie, and I'm going to be in Pushing Daisies with April. We're making pies.
Jake, did you have a horror movie you're getting dropped into and surviving?
Oh, God, no, just keep going.
Okay. Next project?
Next project is the sequel to Undertow. It's called Raging Sea. It comes out in February. After that, I'm doing a sort of Nancy Drew if she died. It's called Cricket Crosby Dead Girl Detective. And if I was going to be dropped in a horror movie, it would be Sharknado.
How would you survive?
I would go inside.
All you have to do is outrun Tara Reid. My next book is called The Blood Between Us. That comes out May 2016. And I'm actually working right now on a book that has taken me a very, very long time to write. I call it, the working title is Madness. And it's about what happens when you attempt suicide and survive. So it's kind of freaky and in the mind, and I'm actually enjoying it, find it very cathartic to write. As far as horror movies go, I want to be dropped into any of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. I have two ways of surviving. One, I would talk to Freddy and say, "Can I be your intern? Please teach me." Or if that didn't work out, I would OD on Hypnosil. He just take an Adderall.